Donald Trump has finally become completely disillusioned with Russian President Vladimir Putin and stated that it is time to finally start putting real pressure on the Kremlin. Sources in the White House say that the United States president has decided to seize Russian tankers from the Shadow Fleet and has also approved the advancement of a bill on devastating sanctions. After becoming increasingly disillusioned with Vladimir Putin and starting to see him as the main obstacle to ending the war in Ukraine, Trump's team stated that Putin no longer has time or chances for negotiations. The United States president has chosen to apply pressure. At the same time, Trump stated that he is not opposed to the United States participating in Ukraine's future defense system, and even allowed for the possibility of sending troops to ensure security. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron held a closed meeting today with representatives of the government, military command, and the country's parliament, where they discussed sending French troops to Ukraine after the war ends. At the same time, it became known that the presidents of Ukraine and the United States, Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump, are planning to sign an agreement on the prosperity and post-war reconstruction of Ukraine worth $800 billion during the World Economic Forum in Davos, which will take place from January 19 to 23. Zelensky said he expects the Kremlin to respond to the peace plan by the end of January. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss and dive into this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and please leave your comment under this video. This really helps a lot in promoting the content on YouTube, and I would be very grateful for that. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link is in the description. The Telegraph reports that United States President Donald Trump has decided to seize Russian tankers from the Shadow Oil Fleet. He also approved the advancement of a bill on devastating sanctions in the United States Congress. After he began to grow increasingly disappointed in the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and started to see him as the main obstacle to ending the war in Ukraine. The publication's sources say the White House's actions signal to Moscow that time for a peaceful solution is running out, as the Trump administration believes Putin is deliberately delaying negotiations. One of the sources close to Trump's inner circle described his approach as a carrot and stick, noting that the carrot has essentially already run out. Another source emphasized that the Russian tactic of 2 steps forward, 1 step back is becoming increasingly apparent to Trump. Putin. In the past, Trump has often spoken positively about Putin and blamed Ukraine for prolonging the war. However, now his administration's views are gradually aligning with those of European allies, who believe that Moscow is deliberately stalling and is not interested in a real end to the war. Here's the most important thing for Ukraine. As the Telegraph writes, Washington is increasingly facing situations where Russia shows a willingness to make agreements, but when it comes to discussing specific points, it either toughens its position or temporarily withdraws from negotiations. Ukraine is becoming more willing to compromise. Trump's earlier claims about trusting Putin's peaceful intentions raised concerns among Kyiv's European partners. In Europe, it was pointed out that warm contacts between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin were often followed by missile and drone strikes on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure. Against this backdrop, the mentality of Donald Trump's administration has become closer to the European view of the conflict than ever before. Vladimir Putin's constant cruelty, his vile behavior, and his games do not go unnoticed by the White House administration. And here we are. Donald Trump himself, the day before after the seizure of another tanker from the Russian Shadow Fleet, stated, quote, "We seized a Russian, sort of semi-Russian ship, and Russia decided not to protect it from us." That was a serious step. In addition, Donald Trump gave the green light to a new bill on devastating sanctions, authored by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Let me remind you, this initiative proposes introducing a tariff of 500 or more, precisely up to 500%, on imports from countries that purchase Russian energy resources and raw materials. After that, Trump stated that the United States would not play a leading role in possible future guarantees of military support for Ukraine in the event of a new Russian invasion. But don't jump to conclusions just yet. Trump stated that the main responsibility should lie with the European allies, but the United States is not refusing either. Trump noted that he is actually not against the participation of the United States in the future defense system of Ukraine. However, only because, in his opinion, there is no risk of a renewed invasion from Russia. Quote, "I am firmly convinced that the Russians will not invade again, otherwise I would not agree to this." On January 7, The Times reported that London and Paris, as part of a coalition of the willing, are ready to send 15,000 troops to Ukraine. It is assumed that these forces will be used to monitor compliance with the terms of a possible peace agreement. And on this occasion, French President Emmanuel Macron held a closed meeting with representatives of the government, military command, and parliament, where the deployment of French troops to Ukraine after the end of the war was discussed, and, as noted, in general, no one opposed this idea. Attendees included Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu, Defense Minister Catherine Wattner, Chief of the General Staff General Fabien Mondon, and leaders of the National Assembly and Senate. And what's interesting here is that during the discussion, some participants considered a coalition of willing countries as a possible alternative to NATO. This coalition is about more than Ukraine. In January, the Times newspaper reported that the Russians would not invade. It is assumed that the Russians would not invade Ukraine. Wars again. Let me remind you that France once left NATO, acquired nuclear weapons, and then returned. Well, that's a separate topic, and I'll also point out another piece of news. The presidents of Ukraine and the United States, Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump, may sign an agreement on the prosperity and post-war reconstruction of Ukraine worth about $800 billion. During the World Economic Forum in Davos, which will take place from January 19 to 23, this was reported by The Telegraph. And so, according to the publication, Volodymyr Zelensky initially expected to visit the White House as early as next week to finalize discussions on both the economic plan and the post-war security guarantees agreement. However, Ukraine's European allies from the coalition of the willing dissuaded Zelensky from traveling to Washington and suggested holding a meeting with Trump at the World Economic Forum. Sources from The Telegraph claim that European Union officials urged Zelensky not to rush into direct dialogue with the United States president. In Brussels, they believe that at this stage, Trump generally supports the desire of European allies to achieve an end to the war on terms that would be favorable to Kyiv. The Prosperity Plan, as it was called, involves attracting about $800 billion over 10 years to rebuild Ukraine and restart the Ukrainian economy. As the publication writes, in Kyiv they hope that offering the United States a share in post-war reconstruction, especially in projects that might interest Trump, will increase Washington's willingness to provide Ukraine with reliable security guarantees. The idea is that if Americans invest in the economy, they'll naturally want to protect those investments. The basis of the potential deal is a minerals agreement that gave American investors preferential access to future mining projects in Ukraine. And so, Trump's special envoy Stephen Witkoff called this agreement a key element. Against this backdrop, Volodymyr Zelensky announced that he is discussing with Washington the possibility of concluding a free trade agreement with zero tariffs, which could become part of a large-scale plan for Ukraine's economic recovery. He noted that the proposed model provides for the abolition of tariffs in trade with the United States and may extend to certain industrially developed regions. In addition, Zelensky said that Kyiv is considering Washington's proposal to create a local free economic zone along the potential line of demarcation after a possible ceasefire. Zelensky described this option as a complex but fair format which, in his words, could become a compromise solution and allow normal life to be restored in certain areas of Donbass. But this is a separate issue that still needs to be discussed in detail. I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel financially with your donation or paid subscription using the links and details provided. In the description of this video, it clearly says support the channel Alexei Pechiy. Choose any format that's convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.